Good morning, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for Panel 1, Strategic Overview of AI and Homeland Security, Current States and Future Trajectories, Future Direction. Allow me to first do a very brief context setting before I hand over to the panel. And just to put things in perspective, this is the most I'm going to talk over the rest of the 1 hour and 10 minutes. The rest of the time is going to be for the panelists. But let me just set the broad picture first. Every successive industrial revolution, every emerging technology has brought a huge impact on society and hence Homeland Security. Because to many, Homeland Security is that mirror image of society. All of the threats, all of the risks, all of the opportunities that society can reap with emerging technology also come to Homeland Security. Whether it's the internet or the printing press, whether it's quantum technology or social media, every tech brings with it those opportunities as well as those scary images that you saw on screen just now, the threats and the risks. AI is no different. And yet, for some reason, especially in the last 2 years, it feels different. One of the reasons why it feels different from the printing press or autonomous vehicles is because artificial intelligence is the first time, and it's the first technology to make us think about thinking. What makes us human? What makes thought independent? What makes creativity? And AI brings so many interesting questions with it. Today, I've got an illustrious panel stretching over 4 countries to share both global as well as local perspectives from and what they're thinking about AI in the Homeland Security context. The good, the bad, the ugly, and possibly even the scary, which, as I'll explain in a short bit, is the part I like the most. Today is just going to be an appetizer for the rest of the next 2 days of conversation. Today's panel will give you a government lens, but there are going to be many other deep dives over the next, few days, 1.5 days, to make sure that you go really deep into each issue. First, a very quick self-introduction of myself. So I'm the Executive Vice President of Advisory and Emerging Business at Ensign Infosecurity. Those of you who got your coffee on level 1, there was a big Ensign Infosecurity sign. We don't sell coffee, we sell cybersecurity, although I think coffee is going to be our more popular thing today. Prior to that, I was the Deputy Commissioner of Cybersecurity for Singapore, and prior to that, I spent a long time in the military. I love discussing emerging technologies, but what I enjoy even more is breaking them, understanding the dark side of these emerging technologies. I'll try my best to be balanced today. And as promised, that's the most I'm going to say for today's panel. I'm going to turn it over now to the panelists themselves. First, a quick warm-up. I'd like each of the panel members to introduce themselves and also in their introduction explain what part of their job interfaces most with AI today. We'll start perhaps with Johann, please.
Yeah, I'm Johann Saathoff, Parliamentary State Secretary of the Ministry of Interior in Germany, and that means I'm a State Secretary, and on the other hand, I'm a member of the Parliament too. So we have a little bit of break of division of power in Germany with this job. And before that, I was mayor of my municipality for more than 10 years. So I come from the community level and raise up to the federal level then. And yeah, what do I have to do with AI? AI is a part of my task I have in the BMI in Germany. And of course, we are facing a new law on the European level, and the BMI in Germany, especially as a country, has put much of work in it. And I had to do lots of work for it, to make sure that that's with a law which makes sense and which lets a nation breathe afterwards.
Thank you so much. We'll get into that conversation of how to regulate it and the laws that you're thinking about later on, but thank you so much. Dimitri, over to you.
Good morning. AI is kind of an indispensable tool today, and part of it goes to how do you think about Homeland Security. In the US, Department of Homeland Security interacts with more citizens every day than any other agency, literally millions of people. We have such a strong interface. We think about the importance of the social dynamic. And against that, what Homeland means to me is trying to understand how we get ahead of the changes that are coming. I do have a personal view that the world of tomorrow is not reflective of the world where we came from. The change is tremendous, and this notion of preparedness is important. How do we get ahead? How do we be more prepared for things that we have never experienced before? Drawing in the tools, the technologies to do that is a tool. At the end of the day, for me, it's not about AI per se, it's about solving problems. And when you try and solve problems in new ways, there is no way to avoid using AI. So it is part of the common fabric of everything we do.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Feng-Ji. To you.
Yeah, I'm Feng-Ji. I'm from the Smart Nation Group in Singapore. Over the past year and a half, we've been grappling with how should Singapore respond to AI. So AI is not new to us, right? Over the last, we launched our first national AI strategy 5 years ago. But generative AI and the more recent developments, which really democratizes many of the users of AI, is something that is both very interesting to us, but also presents new risks. So that's something that we've been looking at very closely, how to govern AI, how to seize the opportunities of AI, how to get our people to have the capabilities to use AI and therefore benefit from it. We think it's quite transformative, and I'm really looking forward to the dialogue later.
Thanks, Feng-Ji. And again, this idea of governance is something we will come back to later on. Jennifer.
Thank you very much, and it's fantastic to be here today. So I'm Jennifer Rubin. I'm the Home Office's Chief Scientific Advisor and the Director General for the areas of science and technology, analysis, research, and data and identity in the Home Office. And so I interact with, sort of my contact with AI is, first of all, I have the directorate that is the senior responsible ownership for AI across the Home Office. And so for all, the Home Office's 3 main mission areas, which is migration and borders, counterterrorism, counter-extremism, the Homeland Security bit that we're all familiar with, and the public safety and policing bit. So across all of those 3 missions, there are ways that AI poses threats and ways that we can harness opportunities. And my role as the Director General for these areas is that I need to make sure that we are arguing for the resources we need in order to make progress on the challenges, that we've got the capabilities we need, as colleagues have said as well, internally in order to tackle those. And as the Chief Scientific Advisor and coming from outside government into government to play this role, I also am thinking about the porosity of the system, about how we make sure, because we can't do it all ourselves, but we have the responsibility to keep the public safe. So how can we bring in that expertise, collaborate internationally and so on to do this?
Excellent. That collaborative perspective is something I do want to get into as well. Yeow Boon?
My name is Yeow Boon, Deputy Chief Executive Development of HTX. So in my current portfolio, we look at a lot of the research verticals covering various range of technology. We look at enterprise, infrastructure, data, cybersecurity, and then also we also oversee the program delivery, more importantly for our home team departments. Now, if you ask me where we are on AI, this is the 2 major challenges. The first challenge that we are dealing with in HTX is how to get our own engineers and scientists to embrace it more, to utilize it more, to exploit the potential of it. The other challenge is also how do we actually get our home team departments to be more familiar, not so fearful, jump into it, all right, and at least to try to see where it goes. I think this is the 2 major challenges we do have. One of the unique programs that HTX is looking at the moment now is that are we able to mobilize a team of a few hundred AI engineers, at least to start the ball rolling. And these are some of the challenges that we might share in the conversation later.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Well, let's put the issue of challenges aside just for a little bit and start with the optimistic perspective, the opportunities. What are the shining bright lights that we see for AI and how it can change what we do for Homeland Security, the opportunities that we think can make society safer and better, and some of the interesting use cases or projects that you are seeing or working with or your teams have surfaced up to you. Maybe Dimitri, we start with you.
Thank you. You know, there are so many great cases right now that we're working on that are having an impact. I think about our use of AI, not in the technology, in terms of the return on investment, in terms of number of children rescued, number of convictions, number of cases. And a few things in my mind, kind of figures of merit, with the issue of bulk cash money laundering, for example, things that took you know, maybe 10 experts, 3 years to dissect in terms of trying to create and understand from the data available the financial networks behind it. Now takes, that it took 3 years in 2019, it's a matter of days today. In child exploitation, in terms of dark web, trying to extract streaming content and trying to figure out the kind of the transnational nature of the criminal organizations or actors behind that, there's been about a 50x speed up in how we generate leads with partners in other countries through these tools. We have many places like this where you see the use of tools in the smart way, driven by a problem that you're trying to solve, is fundamentally transformative, and there is no way to go back. You would not want to go back. And so it sometimes takes a while to get over the bump, to understand the risk model you live in and whether adopting technology makes sense. But at the end of the day, in the places we've seen it, it makes a tremendous difference in the work we do.
Excellent. So it's really sped up the police work on the ground for, you know, you spoke about money laundering, child trafficking. Jennifer, I turn to you. What are the interesting use cases you're seeing in terms of Homeland Security for AI?
Thanks very much. And yeah, so it does feel a bit like an arms race, but we have to be the ones deploying the kind of the opportunity side of that race and make sure we're doing what we can. It's allowing, AI is allowing the kind of data processing at scale that was, you know, previously unthinkable, and that's really important because it allows us insights gained from translation, summarization, the huge internal productivity gains within our own department as well as outside. It's allowing us better detection and threat reduction. So, for example, we're deploying facial recognition at the border. We have a strong ministerial priority around scaling up our policing facial recognition use, and that's fantastic. It's allowing us to increase, you know, in an afternoon we can identify more serious criminals in a crowd, you know, to keep the public safe than officers walking around ever could in a matter of days. So that's a massive scale up in our kind of potential. We've also developed an AI classifier which is allowed to work its way through huge volumes of visual data. So, for example, enabling massive productivity gains in the search for child sexual abuse online, which is a really important one for protecting the public. It's allowing at least an 80% increase in productivity in that space, and we expect that to continue. But almost as importantly, it's also allowing those people who need to search through images to reduce their kind of psychological strain and not to have to be spending quite so much time doing that. The AI can take a lot of the heavy lifting on some of that. So there are massive opportunities across many of those areas. I think there's more to come, as Dimitri and others have said, and we'll be discussing further. But the intersection of new areas like AI and data science with behavioral science, also allowing us to understand how ideas spread, how influence spreads, and where we might be able to intervene best in order to stop that, where it's threat actors acting. So.
Jennifer, I'm not going to let you go just yet, because you said the word collaboration in your introduction. Mm-hmm. How has that influenced some of the opportunities, and who are you collaborating with to find these opportunities?
Well, we're collaborating kind of within, first of all, I should confess that the Home Office isn't quite as integrated a place as we might all wish it to be. So even within our own department and across these missions of Homeland Security, countering terrorism, the kind of immigration and borders and the public safety bits, we often have, there's a risk of things developing in silos. And so the collaboration across those different bits of our department is actually surprisingly important and surprisingly enabled by a focus on what can AI do, because there are interventions and use cases in one that give you ideas for use cases in another, or that are themselves quite portable. So that's one kind of collaboration. Then, of course, there's collaboration with the kind of the wider landscape. So in industry, there's fantastic innovation going on, and we're working more and more with industry partners. The speed at which things are going is driving us to look more quickly and to find ways to break down barriers to doing that, which has not always been easy. But also with the academic landscape. So there are there's lots of expertise in the UK, the Alan Turing Institute, amongst others, where we can turn for really deep knowledge and expertise that no one department or mission is going to have on its own. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, is our international collaborations. I think learning from other countries, as we can do here today, as we do at our security and policing event in the UK, is absolutely fundamental, both because of the capabilities that we each will be developing our own areas and learning from each other, but also the capacity. There's so much to do, so little time, and the more we can share, the better.
Excellent. Johann, over to you. What are the opportunities that you guys are seeing in Germany, and does what Jennifer says in terms of collaborating across academics, industry, the huge industrial estate that Germany has with it, are those things that resonate with you?
I absolutely agree with Jennifer, and it's hard for me to talk about new perspectives because all the perspectives were already mentioned before. But I will add some few. For example, the perspectives of AI in disaster management is something we didn't mention before, which is, in my opinion, a very good perspective to do a very much professional, upscaled disaster management than it has before. Of course, all the things about sexual abuse of children, somehow to make sure that the officers don't have to see all the pictures and the video frames and get a better work. And of course, AI is an opportunity to get an approach for the situation we have faced with, at least in everywhere in Europe, but especially in Germany, which is a demographic change we are looking to, and we have to find solutions in a few years how we can make sure that our government is working properly, and even though we have less skilled workers in Germany.
You said something that's quite fascinating. I just wanted to say a little bit more about it. You mentioned this issue of protecting the officers from having to view the images. How did that idea come about, and how has that been worked out in practice?
Just imagine the job of these officers.
I don't want to imagine the job of these officers, actually.
Yeah, but we have to imagine it, because they are doing this job for years and years. And of course, we have some organizational rules for it. Nobody has to see it for 8 hours a day and 5 days a week, but he has to see it for 2 days or for 2 hours one day, and so on and so on. And of course, we want to make sure that the officers can do a much more sensible work, and that a machine can do the work of the officers. And just if you have some doubts about the situation, you have to look into the data. And lots of the data of sexual abuses are coming again and again and again. And AI on the other side is changing it so that you won't find the fingerprint of the picture. And so somebody has to look on these special data, not on the same data again and again and again. So it makes much more sense for the police officers, for example, to do their work then with AI.
Excellent. If I could add,
please.
It's a great space for AI for many reasons, as Johann and Jennifer commented. But to build on it, we maintain millions of images of victims over the years, and AI is used to age and de-age. Is this the same person? And so it fits in this way. AI, because the streaming dark web content where you want to extract images and voice and location and whatever you can, is air-gapped from the cryptocurrency that does the transactions. And so trying to marry those two together and understand the network of financial transactions lives in a separate space that is coincident with the events, but air-gapped technology-wise. And there are a lot of disparate places where you need smarter means to try and break these organizations apart.
Excellent. So it's not just making work faster, which was the original kind of goal. It's a productivity goal. It's also making work better and doing work fundamentally differently, work that could not have been done before. Transformational. Excellent. Feng-Ji, is this what you guys are seeing as well?
Yeah, this is what we are actually seeing in Singapore. So broadly speaking, there are a few categories, right? So AI actually serves as a very useful addition to the force, right? So there is a lot of work that used to take a lot of time for our officers, but with AI, they can do it much faster. And we see this across things such as for scams, right? You have a lot of scam reports coming in, trying to figure out what to focus on and what not to focus on. That used to take a lot of officers' time, and they also weren't that accurate because they get tired. AI can quickly allow you to zoom in and also make linkages, right? So for example, if a scammer has a particular bank account, actually blocking that is far more effective than actually trying to block that phone number, right? So as a useful addition, we found that it also subtracts work. So there's a lot of work that officers do that really, let's say our police officers, we want them to be able to focus on actually policing, not filing reports, not doing compliance, not sorting out reports. These are all things that AI can do so that our policemen can actually focus on being a policeman, not being a clerk, right? So that's the second thing that we find that is very useful as a force multiplier and subtracting work. The last thing that actually I wanted to say about AI is that it also opens up new possibilities, right? So for example, there are a lot of processes that we didn't observe so clearly. So for example, on the airport side, once you're on the runway, it's a bit of a mess of how the different vendors come in and things like that. Or even on industrial estate management. We find that actually on management of large things, having AI there to help make sense of all the footage, how to optimize it, actually allows you to dramatically transform, actually find new synergies that you wouldn't be able to do simply because the complexity and the amount of data that's coming in through is not something that humans can manage. So basically as an addition, as a subtraction of work, as a multiplier, and also thinking about new ways of doing things. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks so much. Yeow, Boon, over to you. What are the interesting projects you guys are looking at, seeing and exploring?
Actually, when we answer the question of opportunities, actually it gets me really quite breathless. I have many home team colleagues in this room over here, and when we look at AI as a topic, and AI can be a panacea for all solutions and all problems, actually it's not true. Because every day, with or without AI, their work has to get done and to be better. But now there's more tools at disposal, and how do we get those tools to be moved into the front line, nearer to them for deployment? I'm a career officer, right, police. Of course, recently joined HTX by scheme, but as a police officer, I know that the pain points, we look at the opportunity, look at the pain points, they don't really like a lot of volumetric work. Day in, day out, doing the same thing. They are besotted with loads of things. So one of the pain point that we are looking at is really how can we actually help the investigator, right, be more efficient, faster, that he can actually solve the case much earlier. Of course, in return, you have a better delivery of justice. This is what maybe bogs us down, make us think about how do we deploy. To the firefighter, our colleagues, right, I know that my firefighting, the SCDF colleagues, they really want to make their officer always safer, right? In responding to any incident. They don't want to lose any life that they're trying to save, and lives of themselves trying to save those they're trying to save. So the paramedics, how do they actually get the triage much earlier so that they can take an instant decision, right? What is to be done next? To my prisons colleagues, right? They have been always thinking about how do they improve the protocols, the treatment, so that the re-offending doesn't really occur, so that they have lesser cases to deal with. Society by nature commits less crime. To my narcotics colleagues, I know they have been dealing probably at the front edge of cyber, a lot of the dark web operations. How do they actually intervene, intercede, right, or intercept the next transaction, preventing supply to the market? I would say to the immigration officers that you see, breeze-through clearance is always top of their mind. How do you actually have a breeze-through clearance and yet keep the borders relatively safe, make less mistakes in the profiling, in the decision of go, no go, the lanes. These are the problem points or the pinpoints I think our home team are looking at. And in this pinpoints, there lies a bit of optimism where we think technology like AI could possibly change the game for them. I think this is probably the task of HTX in the coming few years. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, it sounds like there's lots of exciting projects there. A lot of interesting changes, whether it's adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying. There's all of these opportunities. But what's holding us back? What are the challenges that organizations, that government agencies, that policing and homeland security teams face when it comes to using AI better, using AI more? Maybe, Yeow, we start with you, because you mentioned that training was one of the biggest challenges you have. How do you get your staff to use it more? Could you say a little bit more?
Well, it's breathless to talk about the pain points and the optimism. It's actually quite exacerbating talking about how to do it. Right? We face a number of challenges. Number one, I think the lack of infrastructure internally. It takes time to build AI infrastructures. And the home team, given the tempo of their operations, can't really wait for those infrastructures to be fully in place. Given government's work, it is always very difficult to design an application or an environment that the government feels safe and protected enough to use AI solutions. This is one of the major challenges. The other one is really how do we actually reduce the fear, right? The leap of faith, get the leap of faith going in our departments, right? Embracing some form of the AI application to see some form of potential, thereby creating a very positive reinforcing loop. It is easier said than done, because any single attack, any single mistake, right, that we make in the implementation just bring us 3 steps back, 1 step forward time. So this is one of those challenges that we do say, how do we actually balance the speed of implementation while at the same time gather the trust of our colleagues, right, to adopt those solutions a little bit more. Now, these are some of those things that we have to grapple. They are by no means can be solved overnight. I think that while we can get the infrastructure in place maybe in months or a year, I think the entire mindset, the entire set of trust probably will take maybe as close as 5 years to a decade to really get there. So this is actually one of the biggest challenge. Other than that, is really the lack of AI talent, right, in Singapore, among the few agencies, government, right. There is a very big tussle for talent between the private sector, the public sector. How do we actually in the next few years help the entire system generate more talent pool, right, so that all of us can benefit from the human resource point of view? I think this is one of those aspects that we are looking at together with the whole of government.
So you mentioned talent, you mentioned infrastructure, you mentioned mindset. Mindset's the big one, we'll leave that aside. But many people in the audience, so you said, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. I noticed some people like, wow, that's actually really good progress. 3 steps forward and 1 step back is tremendous rate of change. I think many of us in the public and private sector are used to more 1 step forward, sometimes 1.5 or 2 steps back. But maybe I turn over to Jennifer now. What are you seeing in terms of the challenges that you face incorporating and adopting AI more in Homeland Security context?
Yeah, it's a really important question, because we're every day trying to think about how we can unblock problems and challenges in order to move as quickly as possible, as safely as possible. And one of the challenges which I hear about a lot from my position is data quality. So, Dimitri talked about how the vast numbers of people that Homeland Security in the US interacts with. Obviously, the UK Home Office, the same, and we have billions of data points. And if the data we put into AI is not good quality data, then what we get out from the work we're doing in the interventions is not good either. So the garbage in, garbage out problem is really something we need to work on. And I would link that to something that Boon said, which is about the skills and capabilities, because I talked already about the need to draw on the kind of state-of-the-art knowledge from out there, and whether industry or academia or with our international partners. But we can only do the most we can with that if we've got the internal absorptive capacity to recognize it, to understand it, to pull it in, and the trust and confidence to use it, as Boon said as well. And so that links to the data quality issue, because you need people to have right through to the kind of frontline officers, through to the people recording, through to the people processing, through to the people who are actually developing novel methods, need to understand the importance of that data quality when they're writing things down, when they're logging things, when they're processing. So it's got to be right from the ground up and all the way through, and it links very much to that talent and skills agenda as well. But I think the other thing that we're very, very conscious of in the UK is the need to take the public with us, and indeed Parliament. So there are lots of discussions in the public domain, in parliamentary debates about the safety and security and trust in new AI methods and interventions. And for me, that's absolutely crucial, because the UK has a kind of a storied history of new innovations that didn't actually get adopted or go as well as we might have hoped, because we didn't do that work of taking the public with us, of building that confidence, of helping people understand. And so GM foods, or genetically moderated foods, is a really good example of where we could have gone far and fast, and there just wasn't the kind of the groundwork done to build that. And I know that lots of countries have kind of public engagement sort of exercises and frameworks. We all, many of us do, but actually how we need to engage over AI is a really, really important one that I think is a work in progress, but we're definitely working on that, and I can say a little bit about that later.
Excellent. Feng-Ji?
Yeah, so many points have already been said. Broadly speaking, the way I think about it is an acronym called QT, right? So firstly, C for capabilities. We need to make sure we have capabilities at a few levels, right? At the most broad-based levels, the agencies we have seen adopt AI best are the ones that are digital already, right? Already digital ready, digital native. Therefore, they find it quite easy to take the next leap to make use of AI. But also capabilities at a higher level. Those that are able to do, for example, fine-tuning, able to understand testing and evaluation. You need to have that so that you can actually adopt AI. Second is the closeness between the users and the capabilities, so that you can iterate and understand the use cases. Because AI is very much more democratized now. It's not really about researchers, but really about being very close to the use case and then figuring out what tools I can actually push out there to be used. Third is the issue of trust that Jennifer spoke about. Trust not just among the citizens, right, but among our users. Because AI is fairly new technology, sometimes, I ask them, hey, everything does fail randomly, right? AI is inherently stochastic. But they said, yeah, I know it fails randomly, but at least I know how it fails. The problem with AI to some extent is that we're not comfortable enough to understand how it fails. So building up this degree of trust is very important. Fourth is the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure, not just a compute availability, but also making sure that some of the guardrails, right? For example, where does the data go? And that how do you store your data in a way that can be ingestible by AI? That's also very important. And finally, closing the loop with evaluation and making sure that whatever you do solves the use case, because we will always start with the problem set in mind, understanding how it solves it, gather the data, knowing how to red team it, and then closing the loop back with the users.
Excellent, thanks so much. So QT is the acronym to remember for today. Dimitri, over to you.
Yeah, I guess I'd make 2 points on adoption that from my point of view, make it hard. One is when you're working with organizations that have real operational risk, changing the risk model is not obvious. It's not always clear that doing something with technology is an easy transformation for you, and these things can take time. And so, again, the risk model, when you talk with our law enforcement or first responders, given an extra $1, do you hire a data scientist or do you hire another officer or investigator? And so it's not always a natural thing to try and think about how you transform your organization around AI, because the second point outside of risk is it's a mortgage. If you enter this business, you have to change the way the organizations function, the way data is thought about, the way technology is integrated into the top conversations of the organization. It costs to be in the business. It's money for the infrastructure. It can be very transformative, but it can take years. As we work that internally with parts of Department of Homeland Security, we have places where scientists and researchers sit in adjacent chairs next to investigators over very long periods of time and work through the initial development of tools, making sure it makes sense. And then we have to test it to see, is it actually doing what you think it's doing? And these things are measured in years, not days or weeks or buying something transactionally. It is a transformation at the core. But it's a place we're all going, whether you like it or not. We're all going to be there. It's just a matter of how much you're willing to step into this world.
Excellent. Johann?
Yeah, I would like to raise 3 points when it comes
Please.
to challenges. One of the first point, as a government guy, I would say you need to have a governmental strategy how to deal with data. For example, in Germany, we had for decades the strategy to produce as less data as possible and to store as less data as possible. And now we have the completely opposite data strategy. And then when I held a speech at the German Bundestag about our new data strategy, I was a little bit scared if somebody would argue against it, but it wasn't the case. So there is a recognition for we have to deal in another way with data and we have to collect as much good data as possible. And the second point I want to raise is data protection, because of course we have the situation that lots of people rely on data on the data protection and rely on that the government is protect the data of the people. So we have to deal with this topic in a very broad way, from my opinion. And the third point is we need regulation for AI. That is, of course, a boring thing when we talk about technologies, about tech experts, about budgets, about billions and billions of dollars, and so on and so on. On the other hand, we need regulation because we have to deal on a basis where everybody can rely on, and so it's a hard work for government guys to set up a regulation framework for that.
So we've touched on the issue of mindset change, but you've stepped it up. It's a philosophical change into how we think about data in the first place, where in the past we didn't really think about data, and now data in itself needs a strategy, whether it's to collect it, clean it, use it, share it, internally, externally. That's a huge political shift across many organizations. I want to step a little bit down. I think many in the audience hear the challenges that you're facing, but are there also more mundane challenges that you're looking at? Things like procurement, things like the technology stack that your organizations have. And here I'm going to turn to Yeow Boon because you're closest to the fire when it comes to the actual adoption of these use cases. What are the more mundane challenges you're facing?
Internally, I think we also wish that our procurement process are a lot more faster. And actually it is always very easy to say, hey, this is the issue and this is what things drag out so long. So other than some of the very compelling home team cases like the investigator co-pilot, one of the things that we are really looking at is actually how our internal processes could be aided, right, by a lot of machine learning, a lot of AI applications, data analytics, and of which one of them is the procurement. But however, a lot of the AI applications are a lot more closer to heart. It started with simple productivity tools, right? We see within HTX, many of the officers, I think among us, are into ChatGPT-4 signups, right? You at least have a ChatGPT-4 account now. It has become a very common tool to many of our individual staff. So we believe that actually in the way of scaling up our AI applications, it started with tools that are very close to us, very simple, day-to-day life, it makes a lot of difference. Thereby you get more familiar with it and you are more bold to try new things. This is one of those things that we are working with some of our partners, in particular the cloud service providers, right, to make it platform, all right, and some of the AI features as a service consumed very easily with higher degree of protection and trust among our users. So this is our starting point. The other area that we are really looking at right? It's actually how do you bring those deployment closer to those applications used by our home team departments. Now, this is far more difficult, as what Dimitri mentioned. It is difficult to create AI applications when traditional model, it is a bespoke turnkey model. Right. I think in tomorrow's world, a lot of our applications are hand-in-glove type of development. Indeed, your technicians or your engineers are really sitting side by side with the domain users, together with maybe the industry providers, but very close in operation, developing applications, amending them, iterating versions and versions forward. Maybe some, again, the 2-step forward, 1-step back type, all right, and iterating forward. I think this is the type of a new working model that we are looking at. Without changing those working processes, I would say most of the AI applications probably are more likely to fail in the beginning than succeed. So these are some of the things beyond those AI deployment that we are grappling with internally. Yeah.
So even accepting a mindset within the procurement system that failure is expected. It's a normal part of your procurement process now that this project may not work out. Is itself a change? Is itself something that's a risk, a stochastic risk, as Feng-Ji pointed out? But let's shift it a little bit from not just the challenges, but some of the risks of AI. Now, I'm going to butcher this on purpose, but there's a very famous Chinese saying that every crisis comes with opportunity. And I'm going to butcher it on purpose, because I believe the opposite is also true. Every opportunity comes with an impending crisis if we don't manage it well. Every technology that came into our shores, every technology that came onto our systems, whether it's something as simple as social media, came with an impending crisis that we may not have managed well. AI is no different. For all of the exciting use cases that we've been discussing, AI has also come under a lot of criticism and a lot of fire, whether it's ethical issues, philosophical issues, political issues, human issues. There are risks that people are thinking about. The risks of the data. What was it trained on? What decisions and recommendations is it making? Is it making society better or perpetuating what was already in the data? So all of these are risks that people are thinking about. Especially in a homeland security context, these risks can be magnified to some extent. What are some of the risks that you are thinking about when it comes to using AI, and how are you thinking about those risks? We'll start with Johann first.
AI can be and is a wonderful tool, and can be used for very good things, but of course can be used by bad guys too. And it's like a knife. You can cut cheese with a knife, but you can do bad things too with a knife. So of course we have to see both sides of the medal. And for me it's very important to make sure that the law enforcement is on the same level than the bad guys are. That it is possible that the law enforcement is working with AI on the level like the criminals do as well. And therefore we need, as I told before, therefore we need some regulation. And that is complicated enough, I would say so. So these are lots of things I'm struggling with at the moment, to put them on the same eye level. That is one thing which is very important for me. And if you ask what could be for misused cases of AI, we just discussed about sexual abuse of children, and with AI doing the victims younger or older, and so on and so on. So there are lots of cases. Even I couldn't imagine whatever could be possible from a critical way. And last but not least, I would like to mention the enormous risk for democracies, where we have to face with, where we have to look strongly on it, and to make sure that there aren't any bad guys, especially from foreign nations perhaps, who have some interests in destabilizing countries, and we have to make sure that there will be no possibility for them to do so.
Thanks. We'll dive into this issue of malicious use of AI in a little bit, but I want to keep the conversation on the risks of AI itself first. You used the example of a knife. which is an interesting example. A knife is useful to a good guy, also useful to a bad guy, but a knife on a table does nothing. A knife on its own doesn't do much. The same can't be said for AI. AI on its own is doing things. It is driving decisions. It is making choices. It is in itself alive to some extent, making some form of autonomous choices. And that itself creates its own risks. Dimitri, what are the risks of this system of technologies that you're thinking about and you're worried about? Beyond the malicious attack use, please.
Yeah, so the dark side of these technologies is important to think about. And I think about AI in the following first. It is a technology without a science. It's not that it doesn't use mathematical methods and statistics, that's different, but there is no foundational science behind it. So the kinds of questions we're trying to understand, what are the bounds of its performance? Is it ethical? Is it biased? Does it preserve any civil rights or civil liberty? There is no fundamental way to do that other than trial and error and testing it because, again, it has no understanding beneath it. And the same thing happens to do with the risks. Smarter systems are everywhere. They're going to be more integrated and layered with other technologies built into everything around us. And what's important to understand is the nature of adversarial attacks in AI is dissimilar to cybersecurity. You don't actually have to enter a system to do something. And even the space of what adversarial AI means is still opening up. We already heard about deep fakes and generative AI attacks like that some years ago in images and videos and voice. That's already something which is well known. We see it more in transnational repression. We see it more in driving migration. We see it in places where you can easily target people in native languages with messaging and disinformation as you see fit from anywhere you want. It's different than data poisoning or other kinds of things, but all of these, there's a vast category of ways that smarter systems can be used for bad intentions, or vulnerabilities can be exploited. Knowing something about an AI system can allow you to circumvent it without touching it at all. And so how you conceptualize how to prepare for the world we're in already and entering more forcefully in the future is going to be foundationally different in how we structure our approaches, how we respond to it. And it is, I think, fundamentally something where you have to collaborate and work across borders, including a plug for the workshop Jennifer and I are co-hosting on this topic in the UK soon.
Well, I think, Jennifer, it's a perfect chance to hand over to you. What do you think about this whole dark side of technology? Dimitri, I love what you said. It's a technology without a science. If I could just stretch that a little bit more, it's a technology perhaps with the mathematical science, but not the social sciences. And that's the part that we're most glaringly lacking in the conversation. Jennifer, firstly, tell us a little bit more about this workshop, and then tell us, what are you thinking about this dark side of AI?
Look, I would echo pretty much all of what previous speakers have said on this. If you want me to stay away from the kind of the actual threat use cases, then I'll say that one of the things I think, sort of riffing on the last bit of Dimitri's comments, is that it is a technology without a science, and that means that so not only the social science, but the kind of understanding of how we got to where we are and what that might do, predicting where we might go next with it, which means that so much of our understanding has to be emergent, and we have to be evaluating and understanding what's happening as we implement, as it goes. And so I think one of the risks of this kind of darker side of the technology and of our kind of growing knowledge as it goes is that, again, going back to this public trust and confidence and the ethics, people will be wondering, what is this doing for me? Is it really making me safer? Or is it just helping other people try to catch me out? Is it really enabling us to recruit better people into the right jobs? Or is it actually just shutting out some people? And unless we are actually showing, by the way, I was incredibly pleased to hear, this is probably the first panel I've been on where several other speakers mentioned evaluation before me. I don't know if that's ever happened to me before, but as those who know me know, I'm a real evangelist for this. And not just evaluation where you do something and 2 years later you look back to say, what happened? Did it have the right outcomes? Did it not? We need to be constantly looking for bias. We need to be constantly looking for unintended consequences, even the unknown. So we need to be keeping a broad view of what are we actually achieving here and what impacts is that having on society. So I think a lot about things like facial recognition, which is a huge opportunity, as you say. But if we think about how the public experiences it, we need to make sure that they see and hear and feel those benefits, that they understand that we are catching serious criminals and keeping them safer by doing that. And they need to know that we have tested it very, very carefully for bias and prejudice that might be built in. There was a lot of hype around, early systems where sensors couldn't tell the difference, were less good at detecting darkest skin tones than lightest skin tones, for example. And so it was less functional for some than for others. We need to kind of build an understanding of what's actually happening when we're using these systems. And the risk of not doing that is, first of all, the very, very serious and problematic risk that we do build in bias and that we do build in unfairness into our systems, because that we are all humans and we have our biases. And Daniel Kahneman, who taught us so much about cognitive biases and sadly passed away recently, but won the Nobel Prize for helping us understand that. Of course, the data we have is also about human society and the way we interact, and that has bias built into it. So there's a very serious risk that we aren't cognizant enough of this. We don't build in ways both for ourselves to learn and course correct when we are seeing things happen, but also to help the public see, first of all, that it is not building in bias when we are using it carefully, and that when we do see bad things happening or unintended consequences, we recognize it and we change so that we are focusing on the public good and on fairness for them as well. So that's one thing I would say about that.
And this issue of evaluating it, including for bias, is a really vexing problem because it's not something we've had to think about as much. Feng-Ji, I want to ask, what are your thoughts on, you used the word evaluation before, Jennifer did as well. How are you thinking about understanding this technology, measuring it, evaluating it? And I'll give one very small case study from my own lived experience. So I've got one of those smartwatches that tells your blood oxygen level, but I also have darker skin. So very regularly it'll warn me to go to the hospital because it detects my oxygen level at 90% or 89%. Not because I'm actually dying, but just it hasn't been calibrated to see through this kind of darkness of skin to check the blood oxygen levels. And it's a purely physics problem, it's a science problem, but it has social implications because then it keeps triggering off that SOS alarm to my family and say, look, you better check on your husband. But these are the types of things which we don't think about when we design those systems, but have profound social implications. Feng-Ji, how are you thinking about handling this evaluation challenge?
Yeah, so this is actually quite an interesting and quite novel challenge for us, right? So if you think about AI, it's both a technology without science. It is also a technology that hasn't undergone rigorous engineering, right? So it's still very much in the lab. When you typically use a part or a tool, so for computer science, it tends to be more deterministic. But when you use it in the physical world, they will tell you it's rated for what usage. It tolerates this amount of stress. It fails in this way, it tends to crack here or whatnot. You tend to know these things, right? That is not true for AI today. So what are we thinking about testing? We're thinking of testing it across multiple types of use cases, testing for biases, but also testing to see when does it fail, what kind of input makes it fail. Testing its robustness, so using rate trimming to test it. Testing it against our sample data, right? So these are the sort of testing that we're looking at. Here I want to give a plug for one of the toolkits that we pushed out, AI Verify, right? We're putting it open source because we realize this is a global problem. In order to use a technology well, you need to know what tolerance can you accord it, how it behaves under stress, and we realize that the toolkit to test this is woefully inadequate. There are toolkits to test so for machine learning, there are some toolkits to evaluate this for computer vision, but for generative AI, actually the software to do so is very weak. People are actually resorting more or less to manual rate teaming, right? Or just dumping lots of our sample data or our sample input. Really rigorous testing not really there yet. I think this has to be a global effort. I think this is something that all of us here have to work together on. So a plug for AI Verify. winding back to the area of risks, right? There are actually two issues that you think of. First is the risk of you using AI. Second is the risk of your adversary using AI. And then third is the risk of you not using AI when everyone else is, right? So for us, I think the idea about trust, testing, evaluation, but also understanding what can it be used for, what can it be used for, who is accountable, and making sure all of these are taken care of is a very important part. And then understanding how the bad guys are using it for fake news, for scams, or to try to prod and test your systems. I think that's important. But also being aware that not using it could put you in a far worse state than actually using it.
I think it's a good opportunity for us to shift the conversation really to that issue of the bad guys, the malicious users and use cases of AI. And for many reasons, I come from a cybersecurity background, we see attackers always getting the upper hand for every new emerging technology. They don't follow procurement rules, they don't follow guidelines, they do whatever it takes to win. And to win, whether it's criminal harm, whether it's profit motive, whatever that win might be for them, but they do whatever it takes. And they gain that upper hand in the early days of emerging technology. I want us to try and understand these malicious use cases a little better from your perspective. What are the use cases that you are most worried about, either most systemic, most threatening, most worrying from that malicious use case? Johann, since you started this, I wanted to start with you first.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm a father of 5 children, and of course I'm always anxious about the situation of my children and see what happens in the world. So that is a big problem, I would say so. The next is scamming, a big problem. And coming back to your risk question, I would say that there are not only good guys in the governmental side and bad guys anywhere else, but it could, let me say it like this way, it could be that there would be a country in the world who has summer days bad guys in the government. And you have you have built up a face recognition system with good reasons to protect your borders, to detect criminals and so on and so on. And you could use these systems which you have built up by good reasons for very bad reasons. So these are the malicious frames I'm scared most of.
Excellent. Dimitri? What scares you?
Well, I don't know. Scares, I think, again, it's that we have new classes of threats, again, things that are real, evading biometric technologies, real today. You don't have to envision that it could be. We already know, these kinds of approaches, things you can do. We see them, and more awareness of that. The uses of generative AI, certainly a concern. Again, we see that in things like transnational repression, already a thing. And so there are a lot of these places where the tools of AI and its democratization are allowing much more ease of use and implementation of things than ever before. And so it's not just traditional things that we've seen before AI, enhancing cyber attacks, traditional vectors. It's the fact that there are entirely new categories of things that we haven't seen before. And that's what worries me the most. Enhanced attacks in modalities that we are used to through traditional law enforcement and investigation methods. I think people understand that. But when it's something that you have not envisioned before, because you have not been prepared for that, that's what I worry about the most.
So to flip your earlier narrative, it's not just about doing crime better, it's about doing different crimes. And that's a space that's really growing that we haven't seen before. Feng-Ji?
Yeah, so I completely agree with the earlier ones. It will be the new types of unknown things, risks that come out that I think would be of concern. So for example, things like defeating some of your authentication measures. Previously, voice authentication was quite popular. With AI, actually that probably has to be stopped, right? So some of the things that we used to rely on in our fabric of reality has been okay. Actually, maybe we have to re-examine many of our assumptions about these things. So we tend to think of it in two ways, right? First is the impact, and second is the incidence. So from our side, we see that on things with high incidence, volume crimes, a lot of them are increasingly being more driven by AI, not even generative AI, right? Even more traditional AI, faking pictures, faking videos to actually con people to be deceived into going to scams. These are things that we can see and we likely will see more of in the future. Fake news, right? The volume of fake news just to get people to buy a product or things like that, we're going to see much more of that. But then there'll be the higher impact ones, right? They are rare, but they are nonetheless very impactful. So influencing your elections, right? Adversaries or other actors trying to move sentiment in particular ways. I think those are more existential issues to the proper functioning of democracies that we also have to be concerned about. So both high impact, low incidence ones, but also high incidence volume stuff that becomes on the background. And then what is your fabric of truth that you have going forward? Can people even trust the news that comes out that they see? How do you establish that root of trust for governments to communicate to their citizens? Those are some of the issues that we're grappling with as well.
And just to stretch that point a little bit, even though fake news and trying to deceive people or influence people is not new, the quantity has a quality of its own to some extent. And in this particular case with generative AI making it so easy to just churn all of this out at scale, sometimes even highly targeted, creates a new type of threat that we haven't quite seen. Jennifer, what scares you in terms of the malicious use of AI?
So it's interesting what you said about trying to keep up with people trying to take things that we're doing inside government or in civil society and using it for ill. But actually, a lot of the kind of really serious threats and harms that we might think exist out there or that are being used to detriment, actually the innovations came from people who wanted to harm or exploit or just rent seek or make undue profits. And actually, I actually worry about some of the things that we might not have thought of yet, as Dimitri said, that are out there coming to us, not just from the things we're doing that might be harnessed for bad, but that might actually be innovations in child sexual exploitation and abuse, the industrialization of fraud. Many of them, the threats to electoral integrity, many of them about trust in information, about mis and disinformation at scale, as you say, and what it might do to people's ability to trust what they're seeing, what they're reading, and actually ultimately even to be willing to trade online, because we need to, that's a major economic threat. It's become absolutely part and parcel, I know in Singapore as in other countries, of how people do business, is working online. So if we don't trust our payment systems, if we don't trust what we're seeing and reading, if we don't know whether or not to respond to a message from our children calling for help, we saw the very scary side of this depicted in your traumatic but also optimistic video. Then it becomes very difficult to navigate. What in terms of sort of new kind of thinking about where next, I think some of the use cases that are particularly worrying on the horizon are the convergence of AI with other kinds of innovation and development. So, for example, synthetic biology. I mean, we can now grow brains in a petri dish. We can graft soft tissue onto silicon, and that can then play a game. That thing in a dish can play a game for 5 minutes. So, with very little or no training. So what does that look like in a few years? I mean, that is the stuff of science fiction happening now that may generate entirely new kinds of threats that we're not thinking of. And in a way, if you think about, if I'm asked what keeps me up at night, we know some of the known quantities around child sexual abuse, around around fraud and the risks and trust and so on. But I'm also thinking, what might we not have thought of yet, and how do we actually get there? How do we start to think ahead to those? How do we do scenarios that will help us imagine what we need to be protecting ourselves against for the future?
Since you've started to talk about, what lies ahead in the next few years, I think let's go to that last question. I'll go to Yeow first. We're all quite clear AI is here to stay. It's a long-term endeavor. We need to find a way to incorporate it, not just into society, but into homeland security, our large systems, and in a thoughtful, responsible way. Ideally, there's some part of the system that moves fast and has the latitude to break some things, but there's some part that thinks about how not to break the important things. What are the important steps that you think need to be taken in the next 2 or 3 years, or the things that you're working on in that roadmap of incorporating AI in a safe, secure, responsible manner for your organization? Yeow, we start with you.
Of course, maybe as looking to the future, maybe I reframe the response as there are 3 things that probably I'll look at after talking to our home team colleagues and leaders. Number 1, I think in the implementation of AI, maybe 3I, then these are potential things that they look at. Protect the institution. In implementing AI, we need to be aware that we deal a lot with the data, deal a lot with the decisions, the recommendations. We need to make sure that the institution is protected, right? And in that aspect, you are talking about public trust. So this is one aspect that we pay a lot of attention. How do we help the home team be sure that they are able to protect the institution? The second thing that I thought is worrying me a lot is because of this fanatic push towards AI, we worry that we anyhow implement. So the implementation actually is important. In the speed, right, or the haste of it, we do things, we cut the corners, we don't design properly, we end up with a lot of fragmented systems or architectures that does not augur for the long play. So AI is actually a long play, and I worry about the implementation. So HTX actually wants to take a very long look at how do we implement for the near term and the long term. The third area that I worry about is involving ourselves and our home team colleagues is about inaction. Because of this unfamiliarity, non-ready, we take a look and see. This inaction actually causes us further gaps behind, put us behind, way behind the curve, right? The threats are already leading, right, by the use of it, and our inaction, if we continue to be involved in it, right, probably will create and enlarge the gap. So these are probably the 3I, probably will guide the way that we want to plan and implement AI in the coming years.
Thanks. Jennifer?
I think two of what are considered some of the most boring words in government are strategies and frameworks. But I'm afraid I really do think that in this context they're pretty darn important. So in terms of like how we move forward, I think it's not just a paper exercise to put together a strategy on this, because we need to corral the right kind of funding into the right places. We need to work on procurement and the agility around that, as you said. We need to invest in the skills and the people who will be able to understand, implement carefully, and evaluate. We need to have the kind of communication with the public and engagement. We need to have the international collaborations. Strategies and setting out a proper strategy really can help people see where you want to go, kind of galvanize action around particular areas, and make sure that things don't just all run off in different directions. Well, it can't do the work of making sure, but it can help people see so that we can start to work together to do that. We have a science and technology strategy in the UK, published over a year ago, and it sets out across all of these areas kind of how we want to work and engage as the UK. We have a Home Office Science, Innovation and Technology strategy led by Jason Dewhurst, my Director for Science, who's in the audience, and we're building how we bring people together around these things that we need to do. And then the guidelines, the frameworks are so important because they also communicate and reiterate kind of what we think is important here. So the transparency, the accountability, the making sure that there's fairness and countering risk of bias and so on, as I said, because that tells people this is what we're valuing, this is what we're keeping important. It's important for us and our own home teams, as you call them. It's important for the public as well, and I think those strategies and frameworks can help with all of that.
Excellent. Feng-Ji?
Yeah, so just broadly speaking, there are 3 things that I think we have to do in order to be ready to adopt, but also adopt sensibly, right? So the first is actually agility. So it'll be ABCs, right? So to make it easier to remember. First is agility. So one major set of things that we actually need to do is how do we try it quickly, adopt, and then be prepared to fail, right? And then learn from it and then have that short cycle time of learning. So one set of things that we are looking at are reviewing not just the procurement rules, but the compliance rules as well as the financing rules, right, in government. So they can do some of these small projects faster, prove the concept, proof of value, then scale up quickly. So that's going to be critically important for digital technologies, but all the more so for AI, simply because the technology is moving so fast. Previously, it was just text-based generation. Now we're looking at multimodality. Now we're looking at many other use cases. Second is to be bold in a few areas. So it's quite easy to say I'm going to do an API call to some large language model, right? Which is the majority of our AI use cases. But how do you be bolder in pushing the envelope on specific use cases, on transforming your organization, as Dimitri spoke about? So how do you be bolder? And that actually requires leadership, right? So one of the things that we are likely to do over the next couple of months is to train all senior public sector leaders on digital technologies, but also how to think in this way. Third is collaboration, because many of use cases require very large data sets that will cut across multiple agencies, across maybe even with the private sector. So how do you collect more data, as Johann spoke about, but also then how do you safeguard it? And then working across multiple countries on issues such as governance, on issues such as testing and evaluation, working with large tech companies, right? Because they're pushing out models, but who's testing them? Who's evaluating them? Should there be some consensus on what would be a trusted model? What would be trusted output? So I think that's the 3 areas of work that I think all of us will have to work on going forward.
Excellent. Dimitri.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of things. Test and evaluation and standards. And it's a complicated space for us because our technologies can't interfere with speed of commerce at our ports of entry, at our cargo ports, at airports, at all the places where volume is important. I live on the East Coast now in Washington, and so every fall season we do hurricanes. And there's the European model, there's the US model, each have families, and these are predictive models. And so we'll see all the spaghetti diagrams, they're called, of all the different storm paths, and they change constantly. But we have a sense of what uncertainty means for model-based predictions that impact evacuation routes and things like that. The AI side in test and evaluation has none of that. And we're entering a space where we want to use these tools. How do you test, how do you evaluate them for real cases when you don't have a sense of what the uncertainty means and you don't know what the bounds of performance are? We're going to need case-specific, use case-specific work on, do we need new AI standards for this class of problem at this border crossing? How do we test and evaluate? What guarantees can come with it? What does responsible use mean? All of this is wide open and will be hard.
It will be hard, but important. Johann, thoughts on what's next few steps for you?
Dimitri is right, it will be hard from different ways for me too. When I'm looking on the topics I am engaged with when it comes to AI, I would say I'm working on the data strategy. Even though it's boring, it's very important to have this strategy and to find all this hidden treasures hidden data treasures we have in our offices, and to make them, to let them do sensitive and sensible work. That is a very important point. And the second point I would like to raise in this question is that AI isn't only a technical challenge, it isn't a governmental challenge. Of course it is, but it's not only a governmental challenge, it's a societal challenge. And being a politician, I would say we have to face how do the younger people deal with the AI risks we have in the society? How do the elder people deal with the risks? Can they even imagine what could be possible to make them victims of our AI systems, and so on and so on? And that's a big task for politicians, to face these risks and to eliminate them as good as we can. And being a European, I would say it's it's good to do it in Germany, but it's better to do it in the whole European Union and on the whole European continent, I would say. So, Jennifer.
Well, it's been a wide-ranging conversation. We started off with thinking about the opportunities. What are the interesting ways in which Homeland Security organizations can use AI to add, subtract, multiply, divide their work, do work differently, do different work. We started thinking about some of the challenges we face incorporating those technologies into our daily work processes, whether it's something as philosophical as our approach to data, to something as mundane as getting people to use the technology more proactively. We looked at the risks in terms of ethics, in terms of challenges in the way in which we think about the AI itself, and then the malicious use of AI. And at the end of all of it, we tried to think about what are the next important steps for the way forward. At the end of this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if we've left you feeling optimistic, pessimistic, or just confused. But I will say that the purpose of this panel was not to answer any question, but to fill your head with so many more questions that over the next few days, you try to find answers to. You have those conversations with the panelists, with the individuals in the audience, with the industry participants downstairs, including myself from Ensign, but have those deep conversations, learn, enrich, and grow together. Because at the end of the day, I think the word that matters the most from this conversation is collaboration. We all need to work together to address not just the opportunities, but the shared challenges that AI will bring for Homeland Security. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for an exciting session this morning. Thank you very much, Johann.